The Petroleum Industry Bill is undoubtedly the longest stalled bill in the nation. It has been in the works for close to 2 decades, since it was first introduced in National Assembly in the year 2000. The Nigerian oil and gas industry has for long been begging for such reform, as the law guarding the industry at the moment has become obsolete and no longer relevant to the present realities, having been in place since 1969. For its ambiguity, which may have caused a setback for years, the bill was split into 4 parts by the 8th Assembly. That's namely Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, Petroleum Industry Administrative Bill, Petroleum Host and Impact Community Bill, and Petroleum Industry Fiscal Bill. With the bill still waiting to be passed by the 9th Assembly in the first quarter of 2021, what are the prospects for gas development in the country amidst the global economic shocks marred by the second wave of COVID-19? I have joining me live via Skype from Benin is the former chairman of the Society of Petroleum Engineers Nigerian Council, Mr. Joseph Nwakwe. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Nwakwe.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much.
Yes, just like I said in my introduction, for years we've been waiting for the passage of this very important document. Going back to what we've had before now, that many say are obsolete, talking about the petroleum profit tax and all that kind of laws that we had before now. I'd like us to start this way. Take us through what the PIB is in its entirety. Let an average Nigerian understand what the impact this would have on us as individuals. Before we now go to even the sector, of course, the industry, you have to add that too. But give us make more sense of what this document really speaks of.
Okay, the PIB has been in the works for 20 years. It's principally supposed to be a reform legislation that looks at all aspects of the industry. So there are originally, just like you mentioned, the laws that have guided the industry has been a patchwork over time. And sometime in 1999 thereabout, there was a realization that we needed to reform and update this set of legislation that we have. And so the PIB was supposed to be this omnibus set of legislation that will basically replace most of, so basically you had the framework for the industry prior to, including now, is the Petroleum Act. Then, of course, when we started the deep water, we had the deep water and inland basin PAC Contract Act. So you had this multitude of piece of legislation. We have the Petroleum Profit Tax Act of '59 and all that. So all of this, the idea was to replace all of these pieces of legislation with one that is coherent and modern, up to date with the realities of the industry at this time. So that was the intent. And of course, we've started to have challenges in the hosts. Our license to operate was, as an industry, was quite frankly challenged. So there was need to address host community issues as well. So beyond that, you had this legislative framework that needed to be updated. You had host community challenges that needed a framework that will help address. You had the issue of governance. We've run the industry in a certain way for since inception, really. And there's a school of thought that it hasn't quite delivered on the promise, that we haven't run it quite as well as we should. So there was need to reform the governance systems, regulatory systems, and administration, things like lease administration, to bring them up to date with current realities. So in a sense, you started with one bill that will address everything. And along the line, in the last vintage, we ended up with 4 pieces of legislation: the governance, the administration, the fiscal, and the host community. And because the thinking at the time was that it will enable passage if we took it piecemeal. And now we've gone back to the original intent, which is one piece of legislation that addresses everything. So if you take this PIB, current PIB 2020, it is broken into 4 parts, so which is the 4 elements of fiscal, host community, administration, and governance. So in a sense, that's what PIB is intended to accomplish, reform the oil industry totally.
Great. I like that explanation. Now, Mr. Walker, my next question will be this. Yes, we see this aggressive move by the present legislation talking about the National Assembly and, of course, the House of Representatives. They're so determined to pass this bill. As at the last check, they promised that by April, this will be passed to law. We saw the public hearing, and we saw all that happened on television, live on television, where we're exchanging blows, all because of, I see the issue of interest coming in here again.
Yeah.
How does this come to you?
Well, it has taken us 20 years. So you can see there are interests. If you think of Nigeria, Nigeria is really about interest. So all sorts of interest. It is the harmonization of this interest that will enable passage at the end of the day. So some consensus has to be built around key elements of the provisions in the bill to be able to move forward. So there will always be interest. It's human. You will see it whenever you call a bunch of people together to discuss elements of the bill. There will always be interest. Whether it's fiscal, the IOCs are interested because they are parties to what's going on. Government is a party, government earns revenue. So there will always be interest. So it's really about balancing all of this interest. There's nothing wrong in having people having interest. It's about how you talk to each other, how you harmonize your views, how you balance those interests. It always should be about risk and reward. So people should not get rewarded more than the risk they're willing to take. So my sense is that, yes, we see those interests. It's not a negative thing. It's in the nature of man. All we need to do is sit down and talk to each other and agree to fix this problem. I tell you this, 20 years to pass a piece of legislation, the moment you signaled that you will change your laws, the investment community will be on a sit and wait mode because they just don't know what the new law will be. So we've hurt ourselves long enough. So I will encourage the National Assembly. I hope they get on this. We don't need 100% solution. We don't need a perfect piece of legislation. The industry needs something that is definite, something that reduces uncertainty. Clearly, the huge uncertainty we created by saying that we are changing our laws has hurt us in the last couple of years. You can see it in the investment numbers, they've gone down. You can see it in output. Volumes are struggling. Capacity is a challenge. So the earlier we close that gap, and like I said, we are not looking for 100% solution. I will be happy with a 60% solution. So my sense is that it's encouraging that there is a realization that we need to close this gap by most of the parties, and I hope we do as quickly as possible. But in doing that, let's make sure that we don't hurt the industry. We do things that will indeed help reform the industry, which was the original intent of all of these activities.
Okay, now, Mr. Wakwe, let's take a break where we'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us. I still have Mr. Joseph Nwakwe there, who's still talking to us about the PIB and, of course, what it means for Nigeria's oil and gas industry, the mainstay of the Nigerian economy. Now, Mr. Nwakwe, a key determinant of foreign direct investments for exploration and production activities is the competitiveness and, of course, attractiveness of the petroleum fiscal systems underlining oil and gas development in the country. Now, assessing the attractiveness of the fiscal regime is therefore a key criterion by oil and gas investors in the decision of where to invest for maximum returns. Now, I'm looking at our fiscals now compared to other jurisdictions. Let's just look at maybe Angola and Saudi Arabia. What do you make of it?
Well, in comparing fiscal regimes, you always have to look at peer countries. So Saudi is probably not a peer country. So you have to look at, locations that are similar to yours, because that's how. But beyond that, the thing to remember is in the last couple of years, oil has been found in places where there were no oil a while ago. So, so the investment community has a lot more choices. So you need to really be competitive to attract them to come in. So right now, their global opportunity inventories are rich. So they look at it, they say, oh, why are we going to put money in Nigeria when we can put it in Mozambique or someplace else? So a few new developments. We've seen Senegal, we've seen Ghana come up. We used to be only the beautiful bride over here. Sadly, we are no longer that country where everybody wants to go to. So you need now to craft a fiscal regime that is very attractive to bring them, because you're in a position where they have choices. A lot much. I mean, you've seen what's happening in Guyana and all sorts of places. So you really need to now come up with something that really will attract them. And that's what we did with the Deep Offshore Act. At the time the act was put together, Deep Offshore Nigeria was an unknown territory, and nobody was going to come. So you had to come with a package that is juicy enough to draw the flights. So that's exactly what we did. I imagine that hopefully the fiscal provisions in the current version of the bill will be attractive enough. I've taken a look. They don't look bad. Hopefully they will be able to at least optimize it to be able to make it a lot more competitive, because that's the only way you funding for energy and gas projects are equally down. So if you think about the headwinds we face, so you're dealing with an global energy transition. So money is moving away from fossil fuel development to cleaner energy, right? So the competition for the scarce investment funds out there is fierce. So with all of the discoveries that we've seen, with transition and the push for greener fuels, it's challenging to attract investment. So whatever fiscal arrangements we have has to be really good, that they will be very attractive to the investment community. Otherwise, we won't be able to attract the funds. And if we had the money as a nation, maybe we could go it alone, but we don't. The fact remains that right now we don't. We can't afford to do that. So we need a fiscal arrangement that will really attract capital, foreign FDI and all that. And especially the current version is looking at the midstream and downstream development as well. So it's important that the fiscal arrangements are such that we'll be able to bring in investors in that space.
Almost finally now, I'm not going to ask you this straight up. Do you think that the PIB will address key issues facing gas development, infrastructure, and gas pricing?
Okay, the current version that's the PIB 2020, actually attempted to provide guidance. It spent a lot of time talking about gas pricing, domestic gas pricing, and provisions were made for gas development. It created a midstream infrastructure fund, which I think is a good initiative. However, I really worry that it is being placed within a regulatory environment. So that there are little issues here and there that we need to clean up before we pass the bill, I think. But directionally, the PIB has placed a lot of emphasis on gas development, midstream development, downstream development, probably not as much on upstream, but I can see that in terms of gas-based industrialization. So we always have to link the PIB to the overall sector objective. So what are we really trying to accomplish? We are trying to grow the midstream, which was missing all the while. So refining, gas processing, transportation, we really have not done very well in this area. So there is this focus to shift away a little bit from the upstream and invest more in that and develop that sector. The gas is critical if we're going to fire this economy. If we're going to have products from the gas value chain, we must pay attention to midstream gas development. So that's important. So I think the PIB has made significant progress. There are a few issues that need to be resolved. And if you look at the memos that went to the National Assembly, I've seen most of those have been addressed. So we have a midstream infrastructure fund. We have a brand new regulator in for the midstream and downstream and all of that. So there are ample provisions there. Royalty rates, the tax on the resource tax on gas was zeroed out, which is desirable, but again, we probably need to say it will be, a moratorium is probably better than just saying it's zero. So there are a few things here and there that we need to do to get it to where we want, because you don't want 20 years from now, people say, oh, how did you set NHT at zero? So we need to look at that. I still think that the royalty rates for the gas is slightly too high, I think 5 to 7.5%. I think we can come down a little bit just to make sure that we kickstart that business. If we kickstart it, then of course we will be able to grow volumes and revenue as well. So there are a few issues here and there, but they're not fundamental. They're not deal breakers. So I think the provisions I've looked at are such that I see a couple of years down the road that we would have started to grow the gas and the midstream business. So that's directionally, I think that's what I would say.
You've alluded to the fact that investments actually dropped in that sector. At the check, about 70 billion that came into Africa at a particular time, just $3 billion US came into Nigeria, and that's not really impressive. But I'm not looking at would you advise government to balance the need for, you need to optimize government needs for revenues. At this time, we know government really needs money. And ensuring that, this back to fiscals, that fiscal terms are sufficient to attract investments from oil and gas companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a chicken and egg thing. The government has serious fiscal pressures and challenges that they're dealing with, so they need money. But you have to think of the overall picture, and you have to equally think long term. What you need is to attract investment and grow the business. Of course, you earn revenues with time. So if you try to earn revenues in the near term, you will not be able to attract the investment that will grow the business. So the business will eventually die off. So I think if you ask, my advice is have a long-term view, okay? It's painful, it's tough, but we must recognize that we must grow the business to earn from it. We can't earn from it, it will die off. If you try to earn from it right now, write it immediately. So think about, we need a lot of investment in the onshore space, right? Small fields, they're all marginal. You can't earn a whole lot from those, but you need those investments because those are the ones that will trigger full value chain development that we are hoping will happen. So you've already started seeing marginal field people going into refining and all that. So that is the nature of what we expect to see. But that won't happen if you tax the system out of existence right now, because you need money. So we need to have a long-term view of the industry. So the other advice I will give is that we should look at our portfolio as government. Again, I am not very certain that we are taking any efficiency measures. We need to start looking seriously at the things, government assets in the sector and how efficient they have been. That is a major issue. I think that, yeah, if I have a business that can return maybe 30% per annum, and if it's private sector led, it can return 40, 50% per annum, then I should start asking myself whether it's okay to hold on to that asset, right? So we need to start looking at efficiencies for most of those assets. So those are the kind of things I will be advising. And of course, we need strong regulation. So whatever we do, and the PIB has made various good proposals on how those will be achieved. But again, it takes political will. You need to have somebody who understands why those things are recommended to implement them. So we need to get the right people in the room to have those discussions and implement the provisions if and when it gets passed. So those are some of the things I will advise government on.
I think it's a good way to leave it. Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph Nwankwe. Thank you very much as the former chairman of Society of Petroleum Engineers, Nigerian Council, for sharing your thoughts on this very important topic of discuss.
Thank you very much, Tolu.